will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Today, we are pleased and honored to have Mr. Alan Scholl, who is the Executive Director of Freedom Project Education. During the segment, we would like to help determine who is responsible for America's perceived increase in racial tensions. This should be an interesting program. During our live broadcast, we invite you to call 646-652-4620 with any questions or your own comments, please. That's 646-652-4620. We look forward to hearing you. Now, last week, we had a heck of a problem with our incoming lines. We hope that the problem has been resolved, but do try. If you tried to call in last time and couldn't get through, please do try again. Hopefully everything has been resolved. Alan, welcome back to our program. And before we start our program, I'd like for you to enlighten our audience as to the objective of the Freedom Project Education Program.
Well, the objective of the Freedom Project Education Program is to provide an alternative for education to the public schools, what has gone on in the government schools for more than a century now. The primary objective is to restore the understanding and the teaching of American heritage and history, why we were the greatest country on earth. And I say were because we're rapidly sliding down the hill as we look around the world today. I'm very, very concerned, and I think many parents are, but most parents are what I refer to as recovering public school students. They've been through the mill. They have been in the jar for the marination for 10, 12, 13, 14, 17, 20 years if they've got a PhD. And that system has been designed and very carefully crafted for a particular end. And that end is to create a humanist socialist mindset or worldview. What once was the greatest free enterprise nation in the world, what once was the most Christian nation in the world, sending out missionaries all over the world, what once was the freest nation in the world with the most personal liberty and the least amount of government interference in personal lives, has become nearly now a totalitarian state. Every day I go through the archives and I see new materials coming in. Restrictions, barriers, the EPA dictating to people what they can and cannot do with their riverfront or lakefront or oceanfront property. Property owners being told that the local Department of Natural Resources or the EPA or somebody else is going to dictate to them which trees they can cut and whether or not they can cut any trees on their own property. Those kinds of restrictions of personal property, those kinds of restrictions and really sort of incestuous government and big business collusion to lock people out and to create monopolies where none should exist by the government power. Those things have destroyed much of our freedom. I had a conversation with a lady yesterday, very nice lady. She's considers herself a very conservative Christian. And she works at a major Christian university. I wrote an article recently on my LinkedIn page and asked the question, why is Joe, it was Joe Biden or, no, I take it back. It's our budding socialist Democrat candidate for president was invited there to speak. And there was a good deal of debate, and I read an article, and they were going back and forth about why they would do that, and what was the social ramification. And I wrote a simple article based on that, and I just said, why was he invited there to speak at this formerly very conservative university? Because the children would cheer and because it's what they wanted. And I made the point that this marination, which is multi-generational, I'm sure you know the story of the frog in the water.
Oh, yes.
The frog from the cold water,
Right.
slowly heated, will stay there till it cooks.
Right.
This is a multi-generational frog in the water. And this woman made my point for me. She flew to the defense of the university saying, well, we have a lot of people from the outside community, and if you look at the recording, the people that were cheering for this socialist at this university were mostly people from the community that were invited in. So it's our outreach program. And I said, thank you very much. You've made my case. Can you imagine at this university under its original founder 25 or 30 years ago, inviting a socialist in to speak, and then staff members, and this person happened to be a professor there, defending that action?
Right. I guess that's the problem. Now, if it was a debate, it would have been interesting because then they could have seen the false logic, with Bernie Sanders. He sounds good, but his logic is all wrong. But when you bring him in as the authority and they're the students learning, and they should be learning from the people who are more experienced than they are, that's indoctrination.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what we're having on many different levels and in many different areas, and I know we've gone a little off topic here, but what's happened, and the reason we have all of the problems that we have today, most of them, and particularly the racial strife, which was the topic that we were talking about, we have been conditioned to respond in certain ways, and most of us don't even know it. Much of that has happened in the public school system. I'm of the opinion that we've lost 80 or 85%, perhaps more, of our freedoms through this education system.
I would agree with that.
Some of it, of course, you have to lay to entertainment. Entertainment is laced with it as well, and certainly the media. But most people have at least a little skepticism, a little healthy skepticism about media. They realize today, particularly if they have any shred of Christianity or faith, they realize the media is very, very biased. So they're not going to be making the same mistake that they make when they sit in front of a teacher or a professor as the authority who's been anointed to teach them knowledge, wisdom, and information. I really believe that the only path out of our malady is to begin to re-educate in the truth adults like myself. It's been a long process. You can probably see in the office behind me a couple of bookshelves. If you could see the rest of the office, it's crowded with bookshelves.
Right.
When I began reading in my probably early teens, and seriously reading American history, and I was kind of sucked in by biographies. I read biographies of great people, and there were still a lot of good ones out there that were full of the kind of patriotism that my father exhibited in his life. And I read those, and I began to consume them in voracious manner. I saw a complete contrast between what I was reading about these people and their activities and what was going on in those days and what their philosophies were, the things they believed in. Reading a book about Francis Marion, I happen to be related to Francis Marion, General Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, in the Carolinas during the War of Independence. A lot of people probably don't know this. This gentleman took command of a small ragtag army. They fought a guerrilla war against Cornwallis, and they basically kept him there long enough for the Continental Army to rebuild further north. Major role in the war, and I'm related to him. I'm proud of that. So I read books about him, and I'm reading things like the major battle cry for Continental soldiers. Unlike what college professors today will tell you, it's all about the money. They just wanted to keep their slaves. There's all these false flags. Their major battle cry was "No king but King Jesus." Now that's
I never heard that.
Yeah, that's an important fact that's conveniently been left out by the humanists and the socialists and the Marxists, who have slowly but steadily and very effectively taken over our education systems. So the average kid coming out of school today is laboring under the delusion that all of our founders were these terrible people that were slave owners and just wanted to hang on to their wealth and their slaves, and they were all incredibly wealthy, and they were all white. They've never been taught about Crispus Attucks or any of the freed black men who fought very valiantly. They have a black-white feeling about slavery, and most of them think slavery was invented in the United States of America, that it was an exclusively white or Caucasian thing, and that the United States of America invented it and perpetuated it, and it didn't exist anywhere else in the world. Quite the opposite. The first lawsuit in the United States of America by a slave owner regarding what he considered to be his property, this slave that was the issue for the lawsuit, was a black man who owned another black man and went to court regarding his ownership and rights, perceived rights regarding owning this other human being. Most of the slaves that were imported to this country were captured by people of color in Northern Africa, in what we consider kind of the Arab areas today, and by other tribes. Rival tribes would capture members of tribes that they were at enmity with, capture them, take them to the coast, sell them to the slave traders in the Northern African areas, and on the coast they would be sold to slave ships, slave
But
traders.
also, those slaves didn't only come to the United States; they went all over the world. We only got a very small portion of the number of slaves too.
In many nations of the world,
Right?
And it has existed in some of those nations for thousands of years.
Right.
We also were not the only nation with slaves. Obviously, if you've seen some of the movies, popular movies, England outlawed slavery by legal action. They legislated slavery out of existence. I believe America would have done so within a decade or two of the advent of the Civil War, with the advent of the steel plow and the cotton gin and a number of other pieces of machinery. Slavery, just as an economic issue, was becoming very, very expensive, and slavery was dying already in many of the agricultural areas just because of the cost and all of the other factors.
That's very interesting, because you're absolutely correct. Now that you've said it, I'm thinking it, but I had never thought of that before, about how technology was going to replace the slave. And I don't think I have ever read that anywhere. Thank you for saying that.
That was in history books. It's interesting. Some of the history books that my grandmother had. My grandmother taught school. My pioneering family here, a very diverse group of people. Some were Irish, came from Ireland in the the mid 1800s, 1840s. Some of my German relatives, the Scholl name, they came from Germany in 1838 and went to New York for a short time, and then ended up homesteading in Indiana. Part of that family and part of my family, which ended up in the Carolinas from the other branch of the family, got together through a marriage. They actually fought. There were four males there that ended up, three of them fighting for the Union, 2nd Indiana Cavalry, one fighting for the North Carolina Infantry. They got back together after the war, and three of them went to California and purchased a Spanish land grant sight unseen, and they took up residence in California. I'm actually named Alan Jackson Scholl. The J is for Jackson, because of the admiration that one of those great uncles had for Stonewall Jackson.
Oh, I see.
He was one of the commanders of the Confederate Army, and on the gravestones of two of my other relatives in Ukiah, California, is the acknowledgement of their membership in the 2nd Indiana Cavalry. So there are, a number of different people in my history who had different opinions and were on different sides of different issues, different political parties, etc. But when I went back and looked at the history, I found, much to my shock and dismay, that even those who would have been a Democrat, or those who would have fought for the South or for the North, they had opinions about things that were very, very patriotic. They engaged in wars. I've had relatives involved in every major war America has been involved in. My father went ashore on Omaha Beach on D-Day. My favorite uncle, who I was named after, Ralph Jackson Scholl, Jack Scholl, he was a paratrooper, 82nd Airborne. He dropped on St. Mary-Glise on D-Day, same time my dad was landing on the beach. I looked at all these people, and they all had a similar set of values. It's a set of values that we're losing slowly. And it's a set of values that everyone in this country should embrace. It's the set of values that got us the level of freedom and the level of prosperity, economic success. It's the level, it's the set of values that most of us would sit down and agree upon. I often sit down with somebody who says they're a Democrat and we have nothing in common. I tell them, well, you want to earn a living, you want to have a home, you'd like to be able to be free to travel, you'd like the government not to tell you what to do every moment of your day. Now, we may disagree on unions, or we may disagree on political parties, which unfortunately over the last 4 or 5 decades have become closer and closer and have both moved further and further to the left. But we would agree on some of those core values. There are elements of those core values that are fading away. Patriotism. During World War II, there were many, many black units in the American Army and in other armies who fought valiantly and very courageously and served in tremendous ways. There were tank battalions, there were infantry battalions, there were artillery battalions. We had a level of patriotism, belief in the principles of this country, even if they were not receiving all the benefits, even if they were not fully vetted and they were suffering prejudice or there were preferential treatments of certain races or segments of society. People understood the values and strove for the goal. It was the utopia of an American patriot was to eliminate those wrinkles and warts and achieve the goals that our founders set forth. What's happened in the education system is now we have conditioned people to loathe their history and their heritage, to disrespect Constitution and government and systems and free enterprise, to see free enterprise or business through a filter, a murky filter of multinational corporations and the rape of the environment and things like that. And this has all been a fabric that is a complete reversal. It's flipped completely over. It's not an accident. When we have racial strife, the animosity of a black community in Missouri or in Texas or anywhere toward police, toward authority, is a part of that process. You remember, we're of an age we remember, but the teens and 20 and 30 somethings that are coming into the electorate today, they don't remember the unrest of the 60s and 70s.
Oh yes, I recall actually going to work one day, getting up out of the subway. A National Guardman came up to me with a shield, put it over my head, had an automatic weapon in the other hand, and we had to run to my factory where I was working when I was young. I remember that very well.
The Hoffmans and the other people that, we don't teach much about them, or we make them heroes. I get just frustrated when I see a college kid wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt and has no idea who Che Guevara is, other than he'll probably at some point spout the word hero.
Yeah. Right.
Never knowing that this was a communist revolutionary thug who murdered thousands, if not tens of thousands, of Cubans and Central and South Americans in cold blood, and led bloody revolutions that enslaved millions of people. But they're proudly wearing this T-shirt with this guy on it that they know nothing about. Right. But if I go in wearing a T-shirt with George Washington on it,
yeah,
or Thomas Jefferson, they can tell me in great detail how horrible George Washington must have been because he had wooden teeth, or how he was a slave owner.
That's right. Right.
The rhetoric recently about why don't we tear down the Jefferson Memorial and the Washington Monument because they were slave owners.
Right.
They have no sense of where this country came from.
Yeah, I want to interrupt you just for a second, if I may, because we just finished listening to last night the Republican debate, and I don't think it was a debate; it was more of a show. But what I found interesting, although I found it incredibly distasteful, to be very honest with you, the hold on thing, but no mention. Or hardly no mention, and if it was, I just missed it because it wasn't prominent, was no reference to the Bill of Rights, no reference to individual rights and freedoms, no reference to the Constitution, no reference to the Declaration of Independence. None of that was mentioned. No one. Now, I think Rand Paul was given the luxury of about 25 words, and he's the most constitutional person of the group, and he was never included in the debate. I mean, he was sort of given an opportunity to say a few words, and then the camera went off of him, went back to Donald Trump and Carrie and Carly and everyone else, and all they talked about was war, and war. And how we're going to make this country strong again by rebuilding our military, spending more money overseas, repositioning ourselves as the world's military leader and policeman of the world. I mean, everything that you would think that we want to run away from that's destroying this country, they're building up, and that received the applaud. And I literally got sick listening to this thing. But I just wanted your opinion on it and see if maybe I was the only one thinking that way, if you have any comments to make.
Not at all. What's happened is the dialectic of internationalism is part of that marination. We as a people, we as a nation, through our education systems and all these other influences, have been convinced and had embedded in us that somehow America is responsible for policing the world.
Right.
That's a complete reversal. George Washington said we should have as much to do with the peoples of other countries as possible and as little to do with their governments.
Right.
We didn't want entangling alliances. That's right. A phrase right out of George Washington's farewell address. Right. He warned about partisan politics, not only in his farewell address, both of them actually. He also warned about it in his acceptance speech. He talked about the partisanship and the concerns he had about the election process. I've seen the same issues come up time and time again in these debates. Nobody's talking about the restoration of constitutional liberty.
That's right. No one.
Nobody's talking about putting us back on a sound economy. I hear Donald Trump and others saying, I'll create more jobs than the other guys, and our current president. I even hate to use that word in conjunction with him, but he's constantly talking about the economy, how he's building the economy, he's making it better, he's getting more jobs, they've created more jobs. It's not a president's job to create jobs.
That's right.
A president is an executor. They are supposed to be sort of a policeman with no real powers of their own, except in times of declared war, and that declared war must be declared by the Congress, and enforcing the law. And the laws must line up with the Constitution of the United States of America. That is his position. He's the executor. He's the policeman. He enforces the laws, and he leads from that position.
Right.
That counterbalance the checks and balances of a Congress and Senate and a judiciary that's supposed to look at those laws and say whether or not they line up with the Constitution. And if the law doesn't line up with the Constitution, then the law should be struck down. They're all askew.
Right.
We have a court that makes a decision, and Donald Trump, our leading candidate at the moment, makes the statement, well, the court has made had an opinion on that issue, so it's the law of the land. I'm sorry, no, the law of the land is the Constitution.
That's correct.
A decision by the Supreme Court is that. It's a decision, it's an opinion. The courts certainly would take that as a precedent, but also the legislature is supposed to move. And this woman in Tennessee, I believe it was it Tennessee or Kentucky, that was arrested or
Kentucky.
jailed? She wasn't really
Kentucky,
arrested because they had a problem with arresting her. I think contempt was the only thing they could think of to charge her with. She kept asking the right question, and nobody was listening, and nobody was reporting the right question. She kept saying, the Supreme Court made a ruling, they had an opinion, but I am enforcing the laws of my city, state, county, in her case, she's a county official, on marriage, and that law reads that it's one man, one woman. The Supreme Court decision did not vacate the law, and it did not create a new law. What law am I enforcing by issuing a license to two men? And how am I not violating the law and my oath of office by issuing a license that does not line up with the law? And nobody wanted to hear that. It's all about the emotion. It's all about the rhetoric. It's all about the political correctness. The same thing with defense. Maybe the idea of defense in this country, if you go back and you read all the founders, up through at least 1900, with a few marked exceptions, they were supposed to be maintaining a very minimal military for the purposes of defending our borders and our shores,
right,
and our seacoasts. And in the event of a war, if we were attacked, then an army could be raised under those conditions. The Constitution provided for that. And that army was to be who? It was to be the militias, the combined militias,
right, of the
American people.
Yeah.
That is what the Continental Army was the armies of Pennsylvania and Virginia and Rhode Island and all of these other colonies. We were never supposed to be the policemen of other nations. And I hear people today, they'll try to use the argument of, say, the Barbary pirates. Jefferson conducted a war on the Barbary pirates, and we actually invaded a couple of North African countries. Why? Because the Barbary pirates, Arabs of dark-skinned descent, were raiding American, English, and other European ships, stealing what was on the ships, piracy. They were called the Barbary pirates. And they were doing it under the authority of the caliphate of the Muslim religion for several little nations there in what's now roughly the Ivory Coast and several other nations of the coastal areas of Africa. And these little nations were attacking under the authority of their potentates and screaming Allahu Akbar, by the way. Yeah. These them who were white, by the way, and selling them in slave markets in northern Africa. And it became unbearable, and Jefferson raised a Marine force. That was the first use of the U.S. Marines By the way, the leathernecks, that was because of the Simtars. That was that they wore a leather collar to keep from having their heads cut off.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that. I learned something. That's correct. Okay, great.
Because these guys used Simtars, and that was their target, was the neck. But they went over there and they invaded some of these countries and basically, took them down. Put them in their place, gave them the warning, you attack American ships, we're going to come back and get you again, and sent a very strong message. They didn't stay there and police those countries.
Yeah.
We had an enemy who was doing damage to American citizens and property and ships. We sent an army down there, we took care of the problem in no uncertain terms, not limited war, and we didn't stay around as the local police force. We left that to them. And we came home. That is the American concept. In World War I, we got involved in a foreign conflict that had nothing to do with us over a ship called the Andrea Doria and the Lusitania. We had ships that were sunk that were actually carrying armaments to the Brits who were fighting with the Germans. And the Germans said they handed out pamphlets on the gangway in New York when
That's correct. Yeah, right. So don't get on the ship. We're gonna sink it because they're using human shields. Humans were being used as shields for the armament. Yeah.
So we need to reinstall that understanding of, we take care of ourselves, we take care of our own, and we have a strong presence. Washington was unambiguous. He said the best way to prepare for war is to preserve peace is to prepare for war, and to have a strong military capability to avoid foreign incursions. So yes, we needed a military. It was in that day very clearly to be primarily the American citizens.
Yeah.
Let me tell you a story about the last liberal who came up to me and said, we've got to get rid of this plague of small arms on the streets. We've got to sign this treaty in the UN and get rid of all these weapons, because that's what the problem is in the world. That's where all the terrorism is coming from. That's where all the crime comes from, it's the guns. And I said, really? Well, have you ever studied any of the statistics? Because there are many studies on this. And it's summed up best in a book called More Guns, Less Crime.
Right.
And in every single case, the more free the ownership of guns, the less restrictions, the less qualifications, the less crime.
Plano, Texas has the highest gun ratio per person and the lowest crime rate in the United States.
Absolutely. And the inverse is true. You go to Chicago,
right,
where laws are draconian,
right,
and you have the highest murder rate per 100,000 in the world, and much less the country. But
and then people argue. They say, well, oh yeah, that's what the way that works is that all the people in Chicago are getting their guns from Plano, Texas. I say, I love that. That's great. They're going away there to Plano, Texas to get guns so they can come back and shoot people in Chicago. I get it. I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I just had to say that.
Philosophies and policies are oxymoronic.
Yeah.
They don't line up.
Right.
And this is the way I illustrated it to this gentleman. I said, well, you're wrong. You need to go check your facts. And you might find some statistics put out by the Brady Group or somebody else. And if you dig deep enough in those statistics, you'll find out that they've included, death by suicide, police shootings,
right,
accidental shootings, and everything else. Their statistics are hollow and very easily demolished. And statistics are a funny thing anyway. I put together a set of statistics. I'll just briefly throw this in. If you take the number of doctors who kill their patients by malpractice, double medication, wrong medication, cutting off the wrong leg,
right,
over medication. You put all the malpractice together, and you take the number of doctors per 100,000 American citizens and the number of deaths. Doctors are 77 times more likely to kill you than the average gun owner. So obviously what we need to do is outlaw dogs.
Oh, that's great. Alan, I'm getting the cue from our board that we are late on our commercial break. Would you please stay with us during this break? Just take about 1 minute. We'll be right back.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Political talk derived from a historical perspective. Not always palatable, but good food for thought. Pure libertarian talk with host Joe Cristiano. LibertyTalkRadio.com.
Express Test is your go-to company for on-site occupational health testing services. That's right, we said on-site. That means we will meet you at your facility for a free health and occupational safety consultation. Express Test specializes in hearing conservation, respiratory protection, and employee safety. We can help you establish viable programs tailored to your business and employee needs. For your free consultation, call 918-743-2929 or visit us at expresstest.com. That's 918-743-2929 or expresstest.com. Do you find yourself asking, what did you say? Aaron Cristiano of Ranch Acres Audiology has over 25 years of experience helping patients just like you.
Hearing requires conservation. We need to be aware and we need to be responsible for our own hearing health.
Understand more with a little help from Ranch Acres Audiology. Call 918-749-7711. That's 918-749-7711 to learn more. We'd like to thank attorney Constance Squires for her support of Liberty Talk Radio. If you want a comprehensive way to affordably avoid legal issues, call Constance Squires for a free consultation. Call 918-254-9283 or go online at isthyWillDone.com.
Steve Harden of the Harden Insurance Agency has over 30 years of experience designing family insurance protection, including retirement planning. Call 918-488-0024 or go to hardenagency.com and request a free in-depth estate and retirement evaluation. We look forward to earning your trust and helping you meet your life goals.
This isn't your typical talk radio show. This is Liberty. Liberty Talk Radio.
Welcome back, everyone. With us today, we have Mr. Alan Scholl, Executive Director of the Freedom Project Education. We are wandering around on several subjects. Our subject originally was going to be what? I even forgot what our subject was supposed to be. Racial tensions. Racial tensions in the United States. Well, this is pretty close to my heart because I'm a Harlem boy, East Harlem boy. And, of course, in my neighborhood, it was primarily, it was a very old Italian ghetto, but it was really mixed. And then I moved to the Bronx, and that was mostly Puerto Rican territory. And I witnessed many gang wars. I was during the race riots. I was in the middle of that, lived in the middle of that. So this is no stranger to me. And I sang doo-wop back in the 50s. I'm showing my age. I was singing in Harlem in the 1950s. I was singing doo-wop. And my lead was a black fella, Freddie. And my second tenor was Carlos Rivera, and he was Puerto Rican. And I recall my father's birthday. We decided to sing, some old doo-wop songs to him. Went to the house and sang a few songs. And my father stood there frozen. I thought he had died, literally sitting in the seat, because he did not even blink during the time we sang about 3 songs. And when they left, he basically told me I wasn't his son anymore. He was so mad because I had a black guy and a Puerto Rican, And it was strange because he wasn't a prejudiced guy, but he saw his son singing with other than white guys, and it didn't sit well with him. Anyway, but I'm from that era, and I have disdain for all of this illogical meandering that we have on race. I don't think it has anything to do with race. I think it has to do with government intervention with the family, breaking up of the family, breaking up of the inability for people to do for themselves because it's easier for someone to do it for them. I think society, the very fabric of society, has a lot to do with it. But I certainly want to hear your take on it.
Well, I grew up in a very different environment. I grew up in a small town in California. It was a logging town. Masonite was the biggest industry there. I did not actually see a person of color until I was probably 6 or 7 years old. We went down to San Francisco, went to the zoo, and there was a diversity of people there. And I guess I was just amazed at the different hues of people that I saw, the skin color. Never seen that before. I asked a few, juvenile questions of my dad, who are these people? Where did they come from? And my father was not prejudiced. I'll rephrase that. He was prejudiced against anyone who refused to understand that race was not their problem. He had a bootstrap mentality. We didn't grow up in a wealthy family. It was eking out a living. My dad worked in a gas station, and he ran a gas station. Then he was a parts man and a parts manager, and he was service manager in an automobile dealership. I mean, it was not no silver spoons here. All my life, I had influences in the home, and no influences outside that, except maybe media and the public schools, that told me that there was some sort of difference or inferiority or superiority based on the amount of melanin in your skin.
Right.
I don't, and I've never hated anyone because of the amount of melanin in their skin. Right. Being a Christian, Joe, my viewpoint is I go back to the Bible for virtually everything if I want to get the final authority. And according to my Bible, there are no races. There's only one race. It's called the human race.
Right.
Everybody else is a variation based on melanin content, and we have more physiology in common than we have at odds. And a lot of that was I think environmental, microevolution. I'm not an evolutionist. I'm a creationist. But I also used to raise livestock. I know that you can combine animals for certain traits, and you can create a whole flock of those animals that have that certain trait, and you can accentuate a trait. And I believe that's where races came from. Right. I believe, but in my Bible, we're all brothers. We're human beings. The only difference, really, the only critical values difference is, do you know Jesus Christ? Are you a Christian?
Right.
I also number among my friends people of many races and many different religious denominations and viewpoints, or from Orthodox Jewish to some New Agey type folks, and I try to influence them with what I believe is the truth in a religious area. But what I have perceived growing up that way is that there's an institutionalized racism, and that the source of most of that is government. Right. It comes through the public school systems. They're the ones that really accentuate and make everyone aware of this melanin, content variation. They are the ones who accentuate the differences in ethnic and national origin backgrounds and practices and habits, and that's where I first experienced prejudice based on size, based on age, based on it was on the schoolyard. I got the fire beat out of me several times. I have a brother who's special needs, and he's 4 or 5 years older. He was in the same school ground, but went to the special ed classes, and he was often called names, and I would fly to his defense. And I'm fighting guys that are 18 inches taller than me, and of course I'm getting my tail kicked and my face shoved in the sandbox and all that. But I experienced bullying and prejudice of many different kinds. First girl I ever spoke to on the playground kicked me. I don't think I spoke to another girl for quite some time. There are prejudices out there. I don't intimate there aren't. What I hate is someone who assumes that I hate them.
Right.
Someone who backs me into a corner at a gathering and stabs their finger in my chest and tells me how much I've oppressed them. I had that actually physically done to me in the San Francisco Bay Area back in the early 80s. At a black gentleman with a huge afro who was at a party for a radio talk show host, actually. He was a friend of mine. He had a new home and he had a kind of a housewarming. And this gentleman was there, and he was very politically active. I think he was the Black Panther, and he showed up at this thing. And he just laid into me about how white people had kept him down, and white people kept him from getting jobs and living in certain neighborhoods and this and that and the other thing. But he wasn't saying white people, he was saying you. And he was poking me in the chest as he was doing this. And I finally just put my hands on his chest and I pushed him back about 1.5 feet. And I said, look, you know what? I think you got the wrong guy, because none of that is true of me. And besides which, this business about slavery, I'm afraid you'd be looking for a much, much older man. And that got a nice laugh from the people that were standing around. Right. But I was serious. What I see happening now in the area of race relations is I see everything being done by government at many levels, and about the only level it's not being done at is the local level. Perhaps even in Baltimore, it's not the local level, it's just the police that are trying to achieve some sort of racial harmony and balance. I see Maryland and New York and Florissant and these other areas. I notice that their police forces are, if anything, out of balance racially in the area of more minorities than is represented by the local community.
Now, is that deliberate, true. Or are simply the people of color not applying?
It varies from area to area, and there have been some areas that have pointed out where there's more minorities in the police force than there are in the general population, right. and the other is also true in some areas. I think it's a matter of qualification and applicants. There may be some exceptions. There's also police corruption in some places, I'm sure, right. Just like there's corruption in any other area of life. But it isn't an institutional thing that is nationwide and some smoke-filled room conspiracy to keep people of color.
And I know I have plenty of friends that are in the police department, and they all say the same thing. They're reluctant to go into a strictly black area. It's always a problem. They always have to have radio backup and all this other stuff. They go in almost prepared for trouble. And they don't go in there to start the trouble. It seems to be there waiting for them. Now, why is that in black neighborhoods and they don't have the same situation in other neighborhoods, regardless of the nationality?
Well, there's a good book written by a friend of mine, another friend of mine, black friend of mine, called "It's Okay to Leave the Plantation." And this black gentleman wrote the book because he came to understand that the welfare state in this country was the hand-in-glove replacement for private institutional slavery. In his words, literally, he said, if you're black and you're living on welfare and you're living in a minority exclusive neighborhood, you weren't freed in 1863 or 1865.
I agree with that, yeah.
You simply changed masters.
Right. Excellent point.
And the plantation he's talking about is the dependency syndrome. And that's drummed into young black children in our public schools. You've been oppressed, therefore, we don't have expectations. Now we've got colleges and universities that are issuing edicts and dictates to their faculty to treat young black or young people of color differently because their culture doesn't accept things like working for a living. If I were black today and I heard that, I would be incensed.
Right.
I would be
Absolutely.
in the faces of those administrators right now, very loudly, very adamantly saying, what in the world are you trying to do? What, how dare you? And yet, this is a mentality that many in the, racial studies and the ethnic studies areas of our colleges and universities embrace wholly. We have it coming to us. You owe us welfare. But these are people who are in their 30s and 40s and 50s who could not mathematically even be the grandchildren of anyone that ever served a moment in slavery. If there were no black millionaires and multimillionaires, if we didn't have a black president, if there weren't any, I might buy that argument, but there are millions.
Right.
It's possible.
So we're saying that
Yes,
it's the entitlement mentality and the change of slave owners, basically, as I just said, paraphrasing you, but that's keeping people in this slavery mode. If in fact we withdrew tomorrow every single government program, everyone, and said everyone's on their own, and they can do nothing about it. You can write in the street all you want, nothing's going to change. Do you think what would happen?
Well, first, because of the moral decline in this country, there would be chaos. I mean, we already have some glaring examples of that.
All right,
Maryland.
I agree. Now, let's say we go through 10 days of utter chaos and rioting in the street. What happens after that? Nothing's going to change, though. You're still on your own.
Interesting. That's what's interesting, Joe, because there's always going to be an implosion when there's a major change. And when people have become accustomed to something, unless you get to the point of bread and circuses that Rome and other nations have gone through, and we're getting dangerously close to that level, but what's going to happen is that when the smoke clears and the people who own the businesses and the buildings and the homes come out and say, hey, I want to fix the windows and get the junk off my lawn and go back to life. I want to feed my family. I need a job. They're going to figure out, and as they did in Maryland, a lot of the populace, the rational populace that maybe didn't buy completely into the entitlement thing, or just is sick and tired of the rhetoric, came out, cleaned up the mess, and said, "Hey, enough." And we saw many examples of moral black men and women saying, "You know what? That's my kid out there," and dragging him off by the ear. Standing in front of the crowd and saying, "What are you doing? Knock this nonsense off." They know this is not a path to racial harmony. This is not a path to prosperity. And until we reinstill some of the understanding of the basic principles of free enterprise and working for a living, cause and effect, black prison populations, that's another huge issue in this whole political correctness dogma and doctrine. Did they not commit a crime? If they did not commit a crime, well, God, yes, let's go. Let's find out, who framed them, how they were oppressed, how they, let's clear that up. But I think you'll find most of them committed crimes in broad daylight in front of witnesses, and the court cases are pretty cut and dry. They committed a crime. They stole, they robbed, they raped, they murdered. These things are moral issues. We've got to correct the moral issues. So there's a twofold battle here. One, we've got to restore the principle foundation, and part of that principle foundation is based on those things like that battle cry, "No king but King Jesus." Why did people feel they had to work for a living? Because the Bible has a verse that says, if a man will not work, he should not eat. There were basic premises they lived by.
Well, I've always felt that the death of American character is the enabling process. When you enable people, you kill their character. And when I see those signs, Black Lives Matter, I want to change the sign to say Black Character Matters. And as long as you have a government that enables people, you destroy that character. And when you destroy the character, you have nothing but a shell. And that shell will react to any physical stimulus at all, thus you have a riot. This is my logic. Blow holes in it. Tell me where I'm wrong.
No, absolutely. The character is what those people, what makes those people different who have succeeded, not because they're black and not because they're not white. They have succeeded and exceeded the people around them because they had the character to keep trying. They had the character to ignore or to deal with the prejudice that they encountered and move on. They didn't use it as an excuse to stop functioning. They didn't use it as an excuse to become dependent. Yeah. And that dependency that government institutes is a two-sided coin. The dependency and the provision of food stamps and special treatment for hiring and all these things. On the flip side of that is the power that is exhibited in every welfare office. You go down there and you look at the subservience to the bureaucrats who are handing out the welfare. You look at the attitudes of the people who are doling this out. Those attitudes are eerily similar to the attitudes of a black plantation owner who had disdain for his slaves and felt that he owned them.
Right, absolutely. I worked with a fella who, and this is, I'm going back to the early 60s, late 50s. I'm only 72 and a half years old, so I got a long way to go. And his name was Hugh Snow, and he was a black guy, and we were best of friends. And he was the greatest guy. He was a terrific person, hard worker, honest, had a great personality. But I said, Hugh, you got your last name is wrong. Snow is white. You're not white. So I used to call him Hugh Slush. Because when snow got dirty, it turned black. And he used to laugh. But there was never any racial tension at all. I mean, we were like brothers. And I really wish I could see or talk to this guy today. I loved him so much. And we used to tease each other and whatever. We worked hard together. But I mean, he was an impeccable dresser. He worked hard, and I had the utmost respect for him. And I'm sure when I teased him and he teased me, there was no hard feelings whatsoever. And I always thought that really that's the way it should be. It shouldn't be that if I use a word that may be construed as being, all of a sudden there's racial tensions flare up and the dialogue stops. And this is all so foreign to me because I come from a mixed neighborhood and we all had respect for one another. And although I come from a neighborhood where the Puerto Rican gangs and the black gangs would kill each other. It was horrible. They were the worst. Worst gang wars between the Puerto Ricans and the blacks, and not the whites, by the way, But I just never understood that, and I made friends with everyone. I never had a problem in that regard. So I don't see all of these natural ingrained problems that these feelings that people have. I see the external problem, the external influences that create the problem, but very few people want to address that.
I've seen that in many situations where you have people who are of different races who come together for various purposes, and it's never an issue. We talk about being colorblind. There really won't be an end to prejudice until people of color are also colorblind.
That's right.
Instead of extremely color hypersensitive.
Right.
That's really what we have being fomented by the White House and by most of the agencies of government is this hypersensitivity. When you have a president that sends 3 representatives to the funeral of a guy that just mugged somebody, assaulted somebody, stole something from a shop, walked out in the street, was hailed by a policeman, came back, tried to beat the policeman up, tried to take his weapon, and ended up getting shot. And you got the president sending 3 people to his funeral and making a big deal about him. Then you got a guy who's a sheriff's deputy, decorated servant of the community in Houston, who is gassing up his vehicle, and a guy walks up and empties a gun, shoots him 15 times simply because of the color of his skin, and not a word, not a whisper. Yep. That is prejudice.
Right.
That is the difference. There's a striking difference in that. You can't blame that on something that happened 150 years ago, or prejudice, Jim Crow laws from the 1930s. That is a definite, deliberate act by a president and his administration and many other people, and the Al Sharptons of the world. They feed upon that, and the dependency, and the actual deprivation. Nobody disagrees that there are black children starving and neglected, and black communities that are broken, and things need to be fixed, and people don't have jobs, and we see all that's obvious, all of it's factual, all of it's evidence of something that's wrong. The only disagreement is what's wrong. And the what's wrong is how all of that is being handled.
Give them their dignity back. And I'll end with that note. Really, we don't give people their dignity back. We take it from them, and we pay them to stay that way. That's my opinion. I don't know if you agree, but I wish we would do that.
I think that's in effect what's happening. And that was the gist of my friend's book. And I think it's the real core problem.
Yeah.
Racial tension, I live in a neighborhood that is mixed. I have lived there for 23 years. There has never been an incident in the town that I live in that I'm aware of that's based on race. There could have been some private, fights or something that happened where one person or another or both were prejudiced and something erupted, but I've not witnessed it in terms of a community. Why is that in a town of 80,000 people, that we can live together in harmony for all that time with the diversity of races? We have Hispanic, we have black people, we have a large Hmong community here, Vietnamese community. Why is it that we can live together and prosper together for all that time, and Maryland cannot? Yeah. Maryland has this ongoing problem, or this huge problem that erupts so easily. It really is, how is that being managed? How is that being handled? And what are the characters of the people involved, particularly the leadership people? And that's where I point directly to Barack Obama, and I say, you're a man of no character. You're taking political advantage of a racial strife that wouldn't exist were it not for people like you and how you use this as a tool. Right. And once we recognize that it's character that matters, and we can get the government out of the system altogether and let people build their lives themselves and feel good about themselves and their own accomplishments, rather than having government feed them and enable them, I think this problem will be solved. Would you agree with that? I agree wholeheartedly. Okay. I want to give you, we're past due already, but I want to give you the last minute maybe to sum up and tell our audience about your programs. Well, basically what we're doing, and by the way, our school is colorblind. We don't have a spot on our form for race or melanin content. You even allow Italians? I'm sorry? You even allow Italians? Oh, you bet. You bet. Okay, just checking. But we have a school that teaches basic principles. We teach Latin, we teach logic. Latin, why? Because it's the basis of all the Romance languages and science. We teach logic because it's the basis of thought, rational thought. We teach philosophy because people need to know that there are philosophies that drive how we think and what we do in our actions and political actions. We teach all the 3 R's, the reading and the writing and the arithmetic and all that. We have a wide, broad, very deep and very excellent programs, fully accredited by the National Association of Private Schools, all done online, and it's all live. You have living, breathing teachers, and you do it in the sanctity of your home. So your parents have control of the environment. It's a safe environment, but it's a very good learning environment. Wonderful teachers. And the whole concept here, and the website is fpeusa.org. Freedom Project Education, fpeusa.org. And we have a website, freedomproject.com, where we have a lot of videos and things out there for people to use, free use. The idea is to bring America, and this is a nonprofit, so I'm not making big bucks here. It's to bring America back to its roots, back to its foundations, back to logic and sanity, free enterprise, and liberty. We don't want a government that's a big brother. We don't want a daddy government. We want a government that protects us when it's necessary, that takes care of the necessary functions that the Constitution outlined, and we want a government that stays within those bounds.
Right.
And that's our basic core.
That's
kindergarten
wonderful.
through 12th grade.
You've been an absolutely outstanding guest. I certainly do appreciate your taking this hour with us, and I hope you will accept our invitation to return at a later date.
Oh, absolutely. Just give me a call, Joe, and let me know, and we'll schedule it.
And thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. God bless.
Folks, this is the end of today's program. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, as my wife would say, you are either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, folks, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well. Stay tuned.